does look like a camera lens.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just the default.
So I have, well, we'll give Vikram a second here, but I do have 7 p.m. Should we roll or should we? Do you want to wait a couple minutes, Kevin?
If we have a quorum, I think by the time we get through the preliminaries, we should be ready to go if a few folks are going to join.
Okay. All right. So I will start then. As a preliminary matter, this is Judy Vetter, Chair of the Finance Committee. Please permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Mark Adler.
Hello.
Vikram Chabra.
Present.
Dennis O'Connell.
Present.
Aaron Howard.
Present.
And Hannah said she was not going to be able to be with us this evening. Jordan Rubin.
Here.
Carlos Garcia.
I'm here.
Mark Murray.
Present.
Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Kevin Mizikar.
Present.
Kristen Lass. Is Kristen going to be with us this evening?
She is not, no.
Okay. And Alexandra Martinez.
Present.
Good evening. This open meeting of the Finance Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the COVID-19 virus. The order, which you can find posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely, so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will not feature public comment. For this meeting, the Finance Committee is convening by Google Meet as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Permit me to cover some ground rules for the effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I, Judy Vetter, will introduce each board member or staff member who has the lead role for this particular item or guest speaker associated with this item on the agenda. After they conclude the remarks, the chair will go down the line of members first and then to staff members, inviting each by name to provide any comment or questions. I will then call upon the members to offer a motion and then for a second. Please hold until your name is called. Please remember to mute and unmute your phone by pressing *6 or mute your computer when you are not speaking, as to not trigger your camera feed or background noise. If members wish to engage in colloquially with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. So at this point, I'm going to call to order the March 4th, 2021 meeting of the Finance Committee. We'll move into the first agenda item, which is accepting the meeting minutes of January 21st, 2021. I briefly looked over the minutes. I did not see any issues. Did any members see anything that they would like to comment on or have corrected in the minutes? Okay, may I get a motion to accept the meeting minutes?
So moved.
May I get a second?
Second.
Okay, we'll go down through then, and all in favor of accepting the meeting minutes? Mark Adler?
Aye.
Vikram Chabra?
Aye.
Dennis O'Connell?
Aye.
Aaron Howard?
Aye.
Jordan Rubin?
Aye.
Carlos Garcia?
Aye.
Mark Murray?
Aye.
Judy Vetter? Aye. The meeting minutes of January 21st, 2021 have been accepted. And now that'll take us to agenda item number 3, the town manager's report. Mr. Mizikar, during the March 2nd joint meeting between the school committee and the Board of Selectmen, a Proposition 2.5 override was discussed. However, at this time, the Board of Selectmen have not decided if they'll put an override question before the voters. Therefore, is it a true statement that the projection 1 budget that we're about to discuss is the first projection of what the budget would look like if a Proposition 2.5 question is not put before the voters, or if an override question is put before the voters but fails to pass?
That is correct. Yes. This is a budget that would include lower levels of funding than some of the projections that we discussed at the end of that March 2nd meeting. That is correct.
Okay, great. So at this point then, if I could turn the agenda to you, Mr. Mizikar, to discuss the projection 1 budget.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen, and knowing that many of you probably tuned in on March 2nd, I've included a couple of those summary slides that I had that evening in case you wanted to refer to them. Obviously, as you noted, there's no decision that's been made with regards to an override, but since they're obviously public information, if there's any questions of the Finance Committee on those slides, I'd be happy to answer them. But I will go through Fiscal Projection 1, which is the base budget that we're proposing without regards to any of those further conversations that are going on. And I'd be happy to pause if the chair indicates there's any questions. Otherwise, I'll kind of keep proceeding through. So this evening, I'd like to talk about the revenue projections that we have for fiscal year 22. And I'll move through the operating budgets on the municipal side, non-utility utilities, which are funded primarily through rates, with the exception of the solid waste pay-as-you-throw program. And I'll provide an overview of staffing levels as we work our way throughout this document. So for fiscal year 22, I can project $154.9 million in total revenue. The vast majority of that revenue, as has been the case, is the property tax. And that makes up now over 55% of total revenues, and actually 58% of total revenues. The property tax continues to be the source of revenue on a percentage basis that's growing the fastest. Most other revenue sources, whether it's local receipts because of the pandemic or state aid, have been relatively flat or slightly declining. Utility revenue has achieved modest growth, but again, those revenues are dedicated for specific purposes to help fund both operating budgets and capital improvements within our physical infrastructure within the town. So we continue to rely more heavily upon the property tax. And as we rely more and more on the property tax, it's obviously constrained by the provisions of Proposition 2.5, which allows us to increase the levy, the total amount of money that we raise, by 2.5% each year, account for any debt service that's excluded, and then account for any new growth, which is new physical structures or personal property that's within the community that wasn't there the prior year. So talk a little bit about our second two largest categories of revenue beyond the property tax. Our second largest category is state aid. State aid, as you can see, as a percentage of the total revenue within the community in the bottom right-hand corner for the town, continues to decline. And that's not necessarily an indication of dollar for dollar reductions year over year. In fact, it has grown year over year in most instances, but it's just not keeping up with pace with the other revenues. And therefore, it's becoming a smaller and smaller piece of our revenue pie as we look at it each and every year. On the left-hand side, you can see that total state aid has increased by almost $2 million from the period of fiscal year 2013 to fiscal year 2022, while our total revenues have increased by almost $46.1 million. So this becomes a challenge whenever Chapter 70 was growing much faster under a different formula in the 1990s and into the early 2000s. The property taxes didn't have to provide as much of a piece of the pie as they have to right now, and that is really constraining our revenue growth year after year because of the provisions of Proposition 2.5. So I think the illustrations on the right hand of the screen are rather telling, and it's just becoming more and more reliant upon the property tax. As I said the other night at the Board of Selectmen's meeting, in Municipal Finance 101, you always want to control your own destiny. So the more that we can control our own destiny through our own property tax levy, and the less we are reliant upon third parties, whether it's the state or other entities that we may receive grants from, the more fiscally stable we will be. But obviously, it's a painful transition as it has a more direct financial impact upon the residents and taxpayers. Local receipts analysis. This is a simple analysis or projection trying to estimate the impact of COVID-19 on local receipts. The Finance Committee is well aware that local receipts are economically driven and elastic based upon people's discretionary spending. And the largest source of our $10.8 million, over 60% of it, is the motor vehicle excise tax. Motor vehicle excise tax highly relies upon people buying new cars, as the motor vehicle excise tax declines year over year from the year of purchased down to about 20% over after the fourth year. So it's not, it's certainly a challenge whenever people's discretionary income or appetite or regard for future economic strength declines. So I took the 5-year trend from 2019 backwards and applied that to 2020 through 2022 and projected based upon that 5-year trend, we would have likely anticipated to receive about $14.7 million in local receipts for fiscal year 22. I only feel comfortable projecting and budgeting $10.9 million in local receipts. So that's quite a change and quite a difference. And one of the largest factors in my decision making on local receipts, which is within the overall financial fiscal projection 1 document that was issued on February 16th, is motor vehicle excise tax commitment 1, which is our main billing of motor vehicle excise tax, which occurs in February, was 10% less this February than it was last February. Technically, within the fiscal year 21 budget, I did not reduce motor vehicle excise tax by 10% year over year. However, overall, local receipts are performing well enough that they would be able to make up for any difference between what I had budgeted and what we may actually receive in fiscal year 21. We had talked in previous years about trying to budget closer between actuals, estimating our budgeted amount closer to what we actually think we're going to receive. And COVID-19 really forced our hands on that for fiscal year 21. So not only did local receipts provide a significant revenue source for us for ongoing operations, but it was always part of the plan to generate reserves, creating free cash of a certain amount to help with the overall financial picture. And that will not be the case in future years. We'll still have to budget with sufficient cushion to be able to make sure that we don't estimate what we'll receive, but the margins will be much closer year over year because we need every dollar of revenue to not impact operations. So if we look at overall revenues for the fiscal year, I've divided them up a little bit differently this year into 2 main categories of restricted and unrestricted. And then I've divided the various aspects of the revenue categories among restricted and unrestricted. And really simply, it is just that. I'm trying to illustrate here that although we may have $154.8 million in total projected revenues for fiscal year 22, where we only have complete discretion, meaning that the funding could go to any aspect of municipal or educational operations on about 119 of that. The balance is locked up or restricted for various reasons. And the largest category is utility revenue, which is dedicated solely for the operation of our infrastructure and solid waste collection programs. The second largest category, of course, is taxation. It's exempt and it can only be used for debt service. State aid has certain restrictions on it or is offset for specific purposes, so it has limited application of the state aid that we get. And then on a policy basis, we restrict how we use free cash. The $750,000 is targeted to go into stabilization. We receive other revenue, mainly from Selco, of about $1.7 million to cover their debt service. And then we have miscellaneous restricted funds for the overlay reserve and things like that within our budget. So, we have a certain full picture of the budget, and then, there's other factors at play that really reduce how our leniency and where we can apply those revenues. So carrying some of those numbers forward on the unrestricted side of the budget, the vast majority of the funding is going to the schools. Over 91% of the unrestricted revenue will be provided to the school department. Operating support, which includes things like the town's contribution to employees' health care, our employer FICA contributions that we're required to provide to the federal government, general insurance, things like that benefit both school and school and municipal operations. Makes up the operating support category. 857,000 is going there. The municipal budget I'm showing on this isn't receiving any new revenue. That certainly doesn't mean that municipal budgets are not increasing, because they are. But this is a reflection of the Board of Selectmen's reduction of $1,590,000 in pension funding that was reallocated on the municipal side of the budget. Municipal budgets, if you include the pension funding, actually declined year over year. The non-operating aspect of this slide includes things that I previously mentioned. We're responsible for covering some state charges, offsets, contribution to Central Mass Regional Planning Commission, and our overlay reserve. So moving from revenues to expenditures, this is the proposed use of the $154.9 million. 45.56% going to educational expenditures, 39.54% to general municipal expenditures. I've broken out all the various enterprise funds and utilities, which are a little bit hard to see on the right-hand side of the screen, but they are just very small percentages in comparison to general municipal and educational expenses. So breaking these out into traditional expenditure categories that we've been using over the previous years, I've broken out the various those various categories to provide year-over-year analysis for you. You will see the third from the bottom line is education. And note, of course, that Dr. Sillier's request is for $75.4 million, and I'm recommending a budget of $70,552,000, a 3.76% increase, and you'll see that 2.556 number mirrors the information on previous slides. Also of note, of course, is that reduction in retirement, and then changes throughout the other revenue categories. You'll note that many of these categories, of course, are much smaller, so percentages often aren't the best point of comparison across the functional areas because they vary so much. But if you look at the dollar amounts, changes year over year, probably your best indicator of what's going on. Within the administration and finance is where you find operating support, which includes health insurance. I noted on the previous slide that almost $900,000 of that change on this slide, administration and finance is going to the operating support, which provides benefits to both municipal and school operations. So in total, on the operating budget side of things, it's about a $6.6 million increase. Largest single category is $3.4 million is going to debt service, which comes in largely from or entirely from restricted sources of revenue, whether that's exempted tax levy or revenue from SELCO. So for the balance of the presentation, I will not be talking about anything related to the educational budget, as that's Dr. Sawyer's role. He does the best job of explaining those nuances along with Mr. Collins. I'll be focusing on the balance of municipal operations, which do include utilities, and I'll do my best to differentiate those. This is a historical trend of full-time equivalents in the town for all aspects of our operations. Of note, you'll see that department has requested 8 more full-time equivalents than I'm proposing to fund, and I will talk about any increases that I'm actually proposing as we go through the various budget categories this evening. So the various departments that make up the revenue categories is the level that I'll go through things this evening, and obviously we get into much greater detail, more of a line item basis whenever we have your budget hearings, but I'll try to touch upon the changes. Significant changes that we're making. Again, administration and finance, the largest department budget within this is operating support. It represents 16.7 of the $19.4 million in this expenditure category. Other notable changes that you will be able to point out there, you can see my FTE flags on the right-hand side of the chart. We are reducing a position and a half within the treasurer collector's office and sliding that responsibility within the town manager's office. The full 1.0 FTE equivalent there is for the benefits coordinator position. We had a change in employees halfway through the fiscal year, and we've hired Nicholas Hawes to be the town's youth benefits coordinator. And along with our continued initiative to centralize the human resource function, we've moved benefits administration within the office of the town manager as we continue to fill that function out. So that's the 1.0 full-time equivalent increase. The half of FTE that was reduced from the treasurer collector's office, we've elected to contract with a third-party benefits administration firm to help support Mr. Hawes in his efforts in providing benefits administration to the 1,300 employees that take health benefits, employees and retirees. And a 0.75, 3/4 of a year position is being recommended as a second assistant town manager position, be assistant town manager for administration and finance. The timing on this position is critical. I anticipate retirements of long tenured employees within the town accountant's office, including the town accountant. We want to take action on a 2016 plan that was produced by the State Department Division of Local Services within the Department of Revenue that recommended consolidation away from direct responsibilities of the town manager and into an assistant town manager's role. This position would be a department head or assistant town manager / department head level within our organization. I propose to fund that position starting in October of 2021 and move forward with the transition for the town accountant's position, providing overlap with Ms. Thompson and whoever we're able to recruit into that position and provide a smooth transition. Ms. Thompson plays a very large role within the organization, and retaining her or trying to gather her institutional knowledge before she leaves will be critical. Since the town has not had a centralized personnel function over the years, she's provided kind of the final gatekeeper. Certainly the buck stops with her when it comes to employment decisions and things like that in the administration of our personnel bylaws. We need to not only get her financial knowledge and processes out of her head and onto paper, but also some of our human resources stuff. Funding a position like this would provide us that opportunity. With regards to operating support, just wanted to provide a little bit more detail with regard to that large line item, $16.7 million. You'll see the second line on this budget is the group health and life insurance. It's proposed at being funded at $13.2 million. It's an 8.35% increase. This provides, as it states, obviously, group health and life insurance benefits to all benefit eligible employees. You'll see at the bottom of the screen in the emboldened chart on health insurance that currently, as of February 1st, 2021, we have 1,294 active and retired individuals who take town health insurance. I'm projecting that the average town cost for health insurance in fiscal year 22 for employees will be $13,995. The town's contribution to health insurance varies on a plan-by-plan basis. However, the vast majority of active plans are a split of 73 town responsibility, 27 employee, and our over 65 plans are all 50-50 split between the town and the employee. Obviously broken down a little bit further, since the school department's larger than municipal, it kind of plays its way out within the health insurance plans as well, as 70% of all health insured individuals are current or former school employees. So public safety, this level of funding really sustains operations, does not provide any additional staff. The numbers are getting larger year over year. We're creeping it up to $10 million in total public safety expenditures. The largest, the police department funding just ensures adequate funding to ensure all shifts are staffed at existing levels, provides contractual collective bargaining increases of 2% cost of living for employees, increases associated lines with them, like our overtime lines and covering court costs and expenses when officers have to go there. Within the fire department, the largest change, in addition to our contracted collective bargaining agreements, is that the SAFER grant funding, which is currently funding 65% of the cost, 75% of the cost for 4 firefighters, switches halfway through fiscal year 22, and we go down to only receiving 35% reimbursement from the federal government as the town continues to pick up the tab as part of the grant agreement. And by January of 2022, the town will be fully responsible for the cost of all those firefighters, which is, of course, in fiscal year 23. Retirement and other post-employment benefits, we're proposing level funding for owners. OPEB pensions will be reduced by $1.6 million. Moving into the general fund aspect of our Department of Public Works operations, it's about $8.6 million. Some of the funding that comes in from this comes in from what we call indirect costs. So it's funded by fees that are generated through utility rates and offset costs like general management oversight, administrative staff, benefits, and costs like that. We are proposing one additional full-time equivalent custodian within public buildings to manage the new Beal School, and one additional full-time equivalent within the highway department, which would be entirely funded through an increase in stormwater fee indirect costs within the general fund. So there's no net impact on the tax rate for that. So in the top right-hand corner, I provided a little chart. Sorry for the overlap of some of the information there. This is a breakout of the public buildings costs associated with Beal. We're estimating about the net impact of the new Beal School to be about $282,000. Here's a quick analysis of retirement funding year over year from last February. Unfortunately, because of a recommendation made by the actuary and revising mortality tables, where we thought we'd be in fiscal year 22 having a fully nearly fully funded pension system, or OPEB and pension system, but a fully funded pension system. We're unfortunately not able to achieve that. We have backed off on the funding year over year, but we'll still be making $3.3 million contribution to our unfunded liability and normal costs for the pension system, and we'll do so through fiscal year 24, where we'll taper off and we will be fully funded based upon our current projections. It's just a repeat of the previous slide. Community development's a very small aspect of our operations, a little over $500,000. No significant changes in any of these departments, no full-time equivalent increases. The same with human services, about $2.2 million, the vast majority of it coming in from the library. No staffing increases across the board here. Debt service is increased for the police station and public safety radio system project, and to cover Selco's debt, which they will be making a revenue contribution, which is included in previous slides. So as we look across the board from the department head requests, both a dollar standpoint and a FTE standpoint, town manager's budget is roughly $1 million less than came in from departments, and not funding 8 full-time equivalents that were requested. The vast majority of those, or half of those, have come through a request from the police department. Various other departments, who I'm sure will explain to you as we go through the budget hearing process, aren't funded either, mainly within the Department of Public Works areas in the library. Moving through utilities, again, no general fund impact on these with the exception of our solid waste budget. We are still in a favorable position where solid waste fees are actually contributing more than 50% of the total revenue required for this budget. We are proposing 3 additional full-time equivalent employee increases, 2 within water, which was a part of the general analysis that we provided or completed in 2018 when we set the new rate. And then in 2019, when we did the same for stormwater. Stormwater activities continue to increase as our permit requirements grow year over year with the federal government for the first 5 years. And the water full-time equivalents is our commitment to improving water quality through regular system maintenance, whether that's valve exercising or completing unidirectional hydrant flushing, which we were very successful with over the course of this fiscal year. This will be bringing it more in-house than relying upon contractors to do that, which is a cost savings. So moving away from the general operating budget into the capital improvement plan, in total proposing a little over $1.7 million in total capital improvements, the vast majority of which is funded through free cash, or one-time expenses being funded through a one-time revenue source. Various projects that we can detail out at a later date. Just a couple things to note that we are trying to catch up on what we didn't fund from the current year, including replacement of library computers, assuming we'll be back to closer to normal operations. Again, picking up some of the projects that dropped off of last year's capital plan, including the Ford Escape within the fire department. And trying to continue to focus on core infrastructure, public buildings maintenance, our largest category of capital improvements, HVAC repairs, which is obviously critical in the COVID time, at Floral School, exterior building repairs at the high school, the restoration of some of the space that's currently used by the Assabet Valley Collaborative into high school space to help relieve overcrowding pressures there are the 3 most significant projects. And we have included IT expenses, which has not been a traditional aspect, but certainly required. These are mainly for infrastructure and security upgrades for this fiscal year. So I've broken those out into detail since we normally don't do those. So again, a little over $1.7 million in total capital improvements. We do have existing debt service for capital improvements, which is funded from the general fund. So I've included that detail here, which in total, if you include what's funded with free cash and the debt service and a few pay-go projects of $124,000 for the general fund, would be a $2.1 million capital improvement plan. Again, with debt included. So that's the end of my presentation, Madam Chair, but I will leave my slides up just in case there's any questions that may be helpful to refer back to.
Thank you, Mr. Mizikar. That was a very good review. I'm going to go down through and the committee now and see if there's any questions or comments. I'm going to start with Mark Adler.
Thank you, Judy. Kevin, you said there was adding an FTE for the public buildings for the new Beal. Is the current custodian at the current Beal shared with Patton, or is there a change with that?
It's just the size difference. So Beal currently has its own custodian, but it's only 30,000 square feet, and the new building's 140. So it's more equivalent to, it's actually a little bit bigger than Sherwood. So we'll be actually have 2 full-time custodians to manage that building.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
I also want to remind the committee members that your questions don't have to be limited just to the presentation. Obviously, we each should have received the Projection 1 budget book. So I think, it's a fair game to open it to any questions. So Mark, does that change? Do you have any further questions? No?
No, I was happy though to limit it to the fiscal projection.
Okay. Well, I'm talking about the budget book. Okay, great. All right. Vikram Chopper, any questions, comments?
Thank you, Mr. Mizikar. I think this was a very well presented presentation, and I have no comments or questions. Thank you.
Okay. Dennis O'Connell, any questions, comments?
Yeah, first I do want to thank Mr. Carr for the presentation. Looks like he really sharpened his pencil. Took a lot of time putting it together, so that's great. I did have a question about the pensions and the pension funding. Did you say by 2024 we would be fully paid up?
Yes, that's correct. So our current projection that's developed annually by our actuary is that 2024 would be a payment identical to 2022 and 2023. And then we would receive relief in 2025, and we would be beyond having on paper, at least for the most part, an unfunded liability, kind of the catch up that we've been really focused on for the last 12 years or so. So it will provide some significant relief within the budget.
Right. So coming into 2025, there will be a little bit of relief. We won't be playing catch up.
Yes, for the pension side, I think the conversation that we'll have to have between now and then is related to other post-employment benefits, or OPEB.
Yeah.
That's within the $3.7 million number. It's only 402,000 of that in this budget. We have a estimated actuarial obligation, unfunded obligation of about $43 million there. That represents kind of, all commitments that we've made to current and future potential retirees. It's something that's really caught the attention of bond rating agencies and other folks, looking at how public entities manage their commitments to employees. It's certainly something that I think we need to work towards and build an OPEB trust fund, which is what we have. I don't see it needing the same amount of funding as we currently use a pay-go model where we're, funding the town's contribution to retirees as we go each year. That actuarial analysis kind of is a number that's cast that says if the town of Shrewsbury ended today and everyone that's currently retired and is active who may retires, and you needed to have that money to give to some successor entity to cover that future liability, that's how much you'd have to have. So it's, in some ways, it's not a real number because I don't think that, I hope it doesn't ever happen. But it's something on the books that we have to consider.
No, that's true. But if there were large, set of new retirees at some point, we would have to be able to fund that. And
Correct.
in order to keep our bond rating, which has helped us very, a lot in the last few years. So what I just wanted to point out is that, well, it looks like we're going to free up a lot of cash by 2025. We really aren't, because we still have a $43 million budget. So we shouldn't be counting on that. The town still has a large liability that needs to be funded. And if it's not funded, the people that will suffer will be the people that need the bond rating, and possibly even the retirees. So so when we talk about the whole budget and we talk about, the tax revenues and where we need to go this year and for 5 or 10 years, it's not just about the school system, the police department, the fire department. It's also about the pension funds that we have out there. And a lot of the people that are going to be counting on that, and they need to be funded. So I just want to make sure I understood that correctly. And I think I do now.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. Like I said, it's a very rosy picture when I look at this graph. What we aren't seeing is that at some point there's still a $43 million, deficit out there, and that line could shoot back up again.
Yes.
So we ought to be thinking as a town about building up, funding, rainy day fund, whatever you want to call it, so that we don't really get hit hard in 5 or 10 years. I think that's all I have for now. But again, thank you for the presentation and for that great answer on my question.
Thank you.
Aaron Howard, any comments or questions?
No questions. Thanks.
Jordan?
Judith?
Nope.
Sorry.
No questions.
Thank you. Carlos Garcia, any questions or comments?
Thank you, Judy. I actually did have a question about the capital improvement plan. In our budget books that we received a few weeks ago, I had noticed that the police chief had requested some body cameras, and I was wondering if you could speak to how many his request would have funded, I guess.
Sure. So the proposal that the chief has made would be for body cameras for the full department, which would be 40. That would be a sufficient number to provide to officers on each shift, so they wouldn't have to pass them off at the end of each shift, and then have some that are both out for general repair and maintenance, breakage, otherwise sequestered for purposes, court cases or whatever it may need to be. So that's the estimated number that we've worked with a consultant to cost out. And those body cameras for year one, both hardware and software, is about $62,000.
Thank you. I'm all set with questions.
Mark Murray, any questions or comments?
No questions or comments, Judy. Thank you.
Kevin, I guess one of the things I want to say is thank you very much for breaking out the restricted and the unrestricted. I think that makes a much clearer picture for anybody that's looking at this. And then I guess I had some questions. The reason why I mentioned the book going through there. On page 44, it talks about the solid waste enterprise, and there's a line in there that says the bag and the sticker fees have remained consistent since inception. I think maybe that's just something that needs to be updated.
It probably does. I will take all blame for the budget document this year because it was largely updated by me. So being down a little bit of staff, certainly it was a few
Yeah, I
typos
don't
in
think,
there.
I don't think you need to provide an apology. That's a minor thing, but
Yep.
just because the fees did just recently go up,
Yes, I
I
definitely agree.
it did catch my attention.
Yep.
I guess one of the questions I have, given the fact that there are new bag fees and sticker fees, how much are we continuing to fund the trash pickup though through tax levy and other revenue? What is that dollar amount?
I can tell you, I'm just going to stop presenting here. I'll be able to tell you in 1 second. So the breakout for the solid waste enterprise for this fiscal year is proposed at, let's see. So the solid waste, so the tax levy itself will provide 1,205,851. And the bag fees will provide, and related fees will provide 1,274,858. So the breakout is about 50.5% to 49.5%.
All right. So in summary, then we are still subsidizing trash pickup at about 1.2 million. Is that what, did I hear that properly?
That's correct. Yep, 1,205,000. Yep.
I guess that's, I feel like I'm a little bit of a broken record on trash, but I do think given some of the issues that we're facing, the budget issues that we're facing, I don't think we can continue to afford to subsidize trash at that amount. I mean, I think there's much higher value services that we have here in the town that need to be supported. And I think it's time that we really kind of challenge some of these old policies and assumptions, because obviously there are things that we need on the municipal side, and obviously, what the school department is talking about is pretty substantial. And $1.2 million, although that certainly isn't going to close the budget gaps that we're talking about, but that's real money. And so I think that that's something that we really, again, we need to relook at some of these policies and assumptions as to how we want to manage the budget. So that's one thing. I guess the other question I had is on page 60, it talked about rental income, and I guess I hadn't actually noticed it broken out like that before. Maybe it has been. But I guess my question is particularly the Edgemere Diner and the Edgemere Mobile Home land. Why don't we sell that property? Why are we using valuable staff time to manage that?
So the Edgemere Mobile Home Park isn't, it's not town-owned land. That's where the state has required us to categorize the fees that we receive for mobile home licenses on that property.
Okay.
The other one is the Edgemere Diner property, which we no longer have a tenant on, and we are considering our future options for, was taken by the town through tax foreclosure. We did have quite a few good years, almost 10 years with a tenant there. And unfortunately, the new tenant took over in January of 2020 and was unable to make it through the pandemic. So yeah, we're definitely considered the future use of the property. We do have a sewer pump station that's immediately adjacent to the diner. So it's a very small parcel, but we are trying to figure out what the best use is.
Okay. And then I guess the multi-million-dollar question here is the school budget. I guess, my personal feeling is that, the state gave us funding to open Beal with a certain program. So, if I was a betting person, I would feel that they're probably going to expect us to open that school with that program. And looking at Dr. Sawyer's February 24th slides, if the school department has to fully open Beal with the projection 1 budget of a 3.76% increase, that will result in nearly a $5 million gap. If the school has to absorb this gap, or that gap, I should say, then they are looking at reducing 81.3 FTEs. I mean, we certainly can't let that happen. I mean, education is extremely important to everyone in the community, not just the kids that are in the school, but everyone, because if we have that type of reduction in the schools, it's going to affect property taxes. And it certainly does affect the children that are being educated. And actually, it hits the kids that are economically disadvantaged kids, I think, more, because one, their parents can't afford to put them in private school, but second, or more importantly, you know, a quality education is a great equalizer. So again, you know, at the beginning when I talked about this projection one is if we don't have a budget override question, or if we don't, or if it doesn't pass, this is what we're looking at. So I guess my question is, are we really going to let that type of reduction have to occur in the schools? And what else can we scrub out of the budget so that we can lessen that impact?
A question for me? Is that a question for me?
Yeah, that's a question for you. Unless someone else would like to tackle it, but I think you're obviously in the hot seat on this one.
Yeah, I mean, so I can't really answer the first part of your question. That's a policy decision that's made, you know, by the Board of Selectmen ultimately as to whether to ask the question or not. Obviously, a lot of insight was provided at their March 2nd meeting with the school committee when those two entities met to have a conversation about the challenge that they're facing. If individuals were to look to the municipal side of the budget to find dollars for the schools without drastically impacting municipal services, or municipal services would be drastically impacted. Whenever you look at the pure municipal service side of the house, you're looking at once you strip out debt service and things like operating support that goes to both the town and schools, general insurance, things like that, you're really left with a budget of less than $30 million. And there's very limited staffing. Obviously, 8 FTEs were requested just to continue services on the town side that I didn't fund. It would be certainly impacting social service aspects of the organization, revenue collection, financial management, things like that. So certainly do not envy Dr. Sawyer, the position that he's in and the school committee's in, and I'm working very diligently with the Board of Selectmen to try to find a revenue model that could sustain and that they may feel comfortable with forwarding to the residents. I know that's been their most compelling comments to me, is that, you know, we need to take our time and make sure the model that we recommend for the town is not rushed, that it's appropriate, that it's thoughtful, that it's sustainable, and that it's something that they can put their commitment behind. So certainly something that we're really working on.
Well, I appreciate that. I guess I just want to underscore that even if a question is put before the voters, there's no guarantee it's going to pass. I mean, hopefully it will. I agree with you. That is the solution that we need. And it's not ideal to talk about further reductions anywhere. But I'm just going to lay it back out there that if we are forced to open deal with the program that we were put out there because that's the way the state funded it, I don't think we can really look at and handle, you know, 81.3 FTE cut out of the school to make that happen. So I think we're going to have to do something. I mean, trash is there's $1.2 million there. I know you can't just flip the switch and make that revenue turn on, but there's one avenue. I don't know what else is out there that is a long-standing tradition or a long-standing policy that we have where we can scrub some of that money out. And certainly paying more for trash isn't the impact that you would have of reducing FTEs in the schools, or as you say, reducing, public safety. No one really wants to reduce public safety and our infrastructures and the valuable services. But anyways, my concern is that this projection one budget as it is here, obviously I know it's going to get tweaked a little bit over time, but for all planning and all good intention could be the budget that we have to live within. So we need to be thinking about those options and trying to figure out what we're really going to let happen. So anyways, those are just my comments. So I'm going to open it. Any other?
So just, So just one thing, if I could. So we have been in conversations with the MSBA regarding the operation of the Beale School and the opening of it, the timing related to it. And, it's still kind of under discussion as to, what their thoughts on it may be. Certainly, I would never expect to be in a situation where we received a state grant for $33 million and would never open the school. I also would be, think that the MSBA would have some level of compassion if we are dealing with a financial situation where we are not able to fully open the school, that they would work with us. So that's still to be determined, of course, and we do have to plan, and I certainly agree with you on that. Of those 81 FTEs, if there is a lesser or no opening of school, that takes care of about 36 of those positions, because it's not a full 81 FTE reduction. There's about, just for my numbers, about 50 positions that would be reduced, obviously a huge and unpalatable number, but about 32 of them are increases over existing levels for the operation of the new school.
You may be right. I am looking at the slide from, maybe I misread the slide from Dr. Sawyer's presentation, but the reduction plan recap, and it looked like, if I read it correctly, it was, deferring opening new Beale, we'd have to reduce 32.6, and the reduction plan. So in future school, it looked like if they had to go all the way, that reduction amount was just under 5 million, and that was 81.3 FTEs. We can get into the details more when we talk to the school committee, but that was where I got that number from.
Sure.
So I may have misunderstood it.
That's true. So of the $5 million funding gap between Dr. Sawyer's number and my number, 1.7 of that is for the opening of the new Beale School. So those 30 teachers have yet to be hired, and that's included in the 80. But,
yeah, and that's what I was trying to, if I'm understanding his slide correctly, then okay, all right, I see what you're saying. All right, so maybe I misinterpreted that, but nonetheless, there is a $5 million gap. I think that's maybe the FTEs is a little bit different, but and obviously we can get into that a little bit more when we talk to the school committee as to what the impact would be. Thank you, Mr. Mizikar. At this point, are there any other questions or comments from anybody on the Finance Committee?
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, please.
Just coming back to the 5 million shortfall, Mr. Mizikar. My understanding is also that a significant portion of that is salary increases for the staff, which was put off and due to the COVID pandemic. I totally understand that we basically have to honor salary increases going ahead, but is there a backup plan in case things do go south that we could push salary increases to a later date with areas if need be?
Um, that's really a question for Dr. Sawyer. I guess the only comment that I would make would be that the contract is settled, so it require some new agreement with the teachers union for the vast majority of those funds. So yeah, but I would leave the rest up to Dr. Sawyer to answer.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Aaron, I saw your hand up.
Yes. Following up on Judy's comments on the trash, I have seen some anecdotally some town residents mentioning hiring private trash haulers, particularly after some of the recent changes over the past year. And if somebody does that, do we actually, because we're subsidizing them, if they are not putting out trash, are we actually, is that a net gain to the town, or does it come out even, or are we losing because they are not buying the blue bags?
No, our trash cost is broken up into two main areas. One is the cost of the hauler, so the contract with Waste Management, and the second part is the fee to tip it and incinerate it at Wheelabrator and Millbury. And certainly we would save on not having a tipping fee, but it would not change the cost of our contract with our waste hauler, as it's based on the routes throughout the total town. So one or two residents who elect to pay more through a private hauler is not saving the town a substantial amount of money.
Okay. So the tipping fee is per ton, but
That's correct.
the routes are they're basically
fixed.
just set. So
Yep.
okay. And have you noticed any, from anecdotally seeing it on social media, it's hard to tell how many people really are making that change. Have you noticed any reduction in bag purchases, or?
No, none. No reduction in purchase of bags or tipping or tonnage or anything like that.
Okay, then presumably
And no
small
complaints about the
percent.
service anymore. So,
Right. Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, I think I saw some additional hands. Am I correct? Mr. O'Connell?
Hi, thank you. I did have a question kind of going back to the bond rating. I'm not exactly sure of everything that would go into the bond rating. Obviously, right now, financially, with the revenues and things we have, we're in good shape. But do they also take into account things like continuously running deficits and having to make cuts, that type of stuff? We talk about if we don't do an override, and again, we're gonna have a lot of time to talk about an override. There's gonna be some major cuts. So we'll see definitely degrading schools, probably see some degradation in public safety in other areas, because I don't think they're just asking for people to have bigger staffs. They've found a need, and I think you pointed out in previous calls, the way Shrewsbury has grown, we're not a town anymore. We're definitely not a small town, so these things are bigger. And we made a choice as a community 30 years ago and further on what we want to do with these quarter-acre lot sizes and you name it, a house on every corner and sometimes two. But are we at risk if we continuously have these budget issues of watching our bond rating go from, where it is today, what is it, I think AAA going down, which would then cost us more in the long run?
I think it's a really good question. So the budget reductions, so we have to have a balanced budget under state law.
Yep.
So we're not really going to be in a situation where, it would accumulate and stack up.
Well, I guess that.
So, no, I think I understand. But we would have the biggest impact I think that would have on the bond rating would be our inability to build reserves. Because obviously, if we're struggling to fund operations, we're not setting any money aside, right? We're using every dollar that we basically have to run, and we're not at the desired policy reserve levels. So there is somewhat of a separation, although both in the financial realm from the bond rating versus kind of what we do on a day-to-day basis. The bond rating is the bigger picture, bigger economic thought. So, these conversations year over year, I can't tell you ironically that Standard & Poor's will look very favorably on the passage of an override, because, it shows support and commitment to funding within the community, right? So, the ability to override Proposition 2.5 for debt purposes and operating purposes is looked favorably upon municipalities, when it does happen. So it like in other states that don't have such clear laws, they just look at it from a different lens. And whenever they go out to bond something, they don't necessarily dollar for dollar get new revenue for that. So that's kind of one benefit of Proposition 2.5 is that we always offset it dollar for dollar with new revenues. So, yeah, but I don't think the budget challenges, unless they really become systemic, would play a big picture.
But as
Play
of
into
now,
the
we're not
picture.
really building reserves, correct?
Correct, absolutely. Other than that, yes.
And I think I just heard you say they were actually a little bit below where typically they'd want reserves for that rating.
That's right. Our stabilization account right now, the policy level is 5% of the operating budget, and it's about 2.5%. So we have a ways to get them.
Okay, so I guess from my standpoint, that does mean in the long, if this trend continues, it's probably not going to be favorable to a AAA, which would reduce the rating, which would then slightly raise the rate. So just a lot of things, to think about as we're going through the finance committee. Is how do we keep Shrewsbury in a good, setting stage so that we can, keep our bond rating. We can continue to attract people to move to the town, both, with businesses and other things. If we cut services, I'm not sure businesses want to move in.
Sure.
So.
Any other? I thought I saw some additional hands. Going once, twice. Okay. Well, then we'll move on to review the meeting schedule. So on next Thursday, March 11th, we have a joint meeting with the school committee. And I want to underscore that is a virtual meeting, and that's going to start at 7:30. Okay, 7:30, not 7:30. And then on March 25th, we have our first of our budget hearings. Again, virtual meeting, and that will start at 6 p.m. And then Saturday, March 27th, again, virtual meeting, and that will begin at 8:30 a.m. And that's scheduled, I believe, until 3:30. And that's where we'll be going a deeper dive into the budget. Mr. Musicor, anything else to add on that, or?
I do not. I will just note, since it's our first meeting since, but the town meeting, as we've noticed or provided notice to the finance committee, has been moved to Saturday, May 22nd.
Okay.
From its traditional Monday. That will give us flexibility for hopefully having a single day meeting. The logistics aren't finalized yet. It'll be not within the Oak Auditorium, either outside or, which is the most likely place, but we have to work that out.
Okay, thank you. And now that takes us to correspondences. An email to the Finance Committee from Sandra Fritz, Chairman of the School Committee, regarding the school committee meeting. Email to the Finance Committee from Beth McCollum, Executive Assistant to the Superintendent, regarding letter from Dr. Sawyer. Email to the Finance Committee from Sandra Fritz, Chair of the School Committee, regarding the tri-board meeting. Email to the Finance Committee from Dr. Joe Sawyer, Superintendent of Schools. Department budget recommendations. Email from Kevin Musicor, Town Manager, regarding open meeting law refresher. Finance email from Sandra Fritz, Chair of the School Committee, regarding fiscal year 22 Superintendent's budget reduction plan. And email from Sandra Fritz, Chair of the School Committee, regarding meeting with the school committee. At this point, unless there's anything else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Okay, I'm going to do a roll call for all in favor of adjourning this evening's meeting. Mark Adler.
Aye.
Vikram Chabra.
Aye.
Dennis O'Connell.
Aye.
Aaron Howard.
Aye.
Jordan Rubin.
Aye.
Carlos Garcia,
Aye.
Mark Murray,
Aye.
Judy Vetter. Aye. Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned. Have a good evening.
Take
Good
care.
evening.
Hi,
Goodbye.
everybody.